question, we wanted to start off by asking you to introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm Mary Thomas Fallons. I'm from Southern California, and I am part of Braver Angels. I'm on the moderator training team, and I'm not sure what else you want to know, but I'll leave it at that.
Can you share a little about where you're from and your family background?
Yeah, so I'm a native Californian, but I love to travel, so I've seen lots of the country and different parts of the world. My family background is Greek, so there's a lot of Greek ethnic things in my life, which I love. And I also grew up in a household where my brother and I were really interested in politics growing up. My sister was a little younger, so maybe that's why I don't remember that. And when I was a teenager, I used to spar with my dad, like opposite views, like it was a sport. And then as I got older, I decided that wasn't really healthy. And especially when I had kids, it was like, oh, this isn't helpful. But it was a diverse political household.
What's one unique thing about you that people might not guess right away?
Let's see, well, anybody who knows me knows I love the outdoors, but I love river rafting, and I love swing dancing and Greek dancing, and if I could travel a lot, I backpacked all through Europe by myself when I was 22, and that was one of the best experiences in my life. So those are just some of the things. I do love my family and my kids, my husband and granddaughter.
What initially motivated you to get involved in addressing political polarization?
There wasn't a specific time where I made a decision. It was bothering me, but then a friend asked me to go to this Braver Angels workshop, and it was a Saturday. I was working full time. I had a lot of work to do over the weekend, and I kind of went begrudgingly. I met in my head, and I decided to go because I love this friend. And oh my gosh, it was life-changing. And probably your next question relates to that, or I can go ahead.
Yeah, how did you first become aware of the impact political polarization is having on society, and how does that awareness shape your approach to tackling it?
So in that first event, it's called the Red Blue Workshop, and it's when actually people discuss the stereotypes they think the other side has about you. And I was surprised at how often I was surprised by things that people politically different than me answered, and surprised in a way that meant, oh my gosh, I didn't know they felt that way. Like I feel that way. And the surprises made me realize the stereotypes I carried. And the people I met were not who I expected. They were so amazing. And so it really made me realize that I had a lot of work to do.
What are the main goals of your work in fighting political polarization?
The main thing is just to stop the contempt and the hatred, and the idea that I'm right and there's no other options. One thing I've really learned from Braver Angels is the idea of political humility, that no one side has all the answers. So just an opportunity for people to talk to each other and listen.
In your opinion, what are the key factors contributing to the current state of political division, and how do you think they can be addressed?
It's really, really easy to blame social media, but I do think it has an impact, especially if it has algorithms that kind of create confirmation bias. I do think there are people that generate a lot of interest by creating conflict and anger. So I think those are things. And then as people become polarized, they don't realize that someone may be interested in stepping out of their silo, but if someone on the other side slams them, they're going to run back to where it's safe. So, I have friends that work on political campaigns, and I've done that in the past. And one thing I think they're missing is when you just fight for your side and add hatred toward the other side, I think it actually goes against your cause, because I think you build more enemies than you create support.
What would an ideal, less polarized society look like to you, and what role do you see for yourself in achieving that vision?
You know, I think right now we all know that the LA fires are just horrendous. And whenever there's been a disaster in our country, I think we've seen communities come out with such great help. And I think we need to remember that most people want to be safe. They want to have, be with family and friends and have a good life. So I really think society would look like a community that cares about one another and reaches out. So the ideal would be when people consider the best in others first and give them a chance to show the best in them. And it starts by being the best in ourselves.
What are some of the biggest challenges you've encountered while working to reduce polarization?
I think one, thinking it's probably silly or, it's just all make nice. I don't think people realize that we don't, Braver Angels knows disagreement has been around since the beginning of our country. So the misconception is that you're going to give up your values or your beliefs. The idea is you can have the ideas and beliefs that you feel, but it's making room for someone else to have theirs. And so I think it's just the idea that, they're awful, I know what I'm doing, and you're being too nice.
What methods or strategies have you found to be most effective in fostering dialogue between people with opposing political views?
So one thing about Braver Angels is they have skills events and they have issue-related events. And what I've learned from the skills events specifically is listening to make someone feel heard. And I think we all have learned that somewhere in our lives, but I've learned it in a way that I never had before. And the other thing is, if you are going to get in a dialogue with someone and have them share what they feel first, have them give their point of view and listen and listen and listen, and then ask questions for clarity, questions of curiosity, but to really hold back in sharing your view until that other person feels heard. And so we call that listen, acknowledge, agree when you can. And it doesn't mean agree like roll over and give up your ideals, but you can even agree that there's a problem that we together might be able to solve. And then the other thing that's been really helpful is a skill called pivot. And if you've made someone feel heard, they're going to be more willing to listen to you. So the pivot is just signaling that you would like to now share your view. So the difference is when I used to spar with my dad, he'd say something, I'd say something. He'd say something, I'd say something. And I'm preparing my argument and I'm not really listening. So I've made the person listen, feel heard. Then I say, I'd like to share my point of view. And you look for some receptivity. I have used this so much in my personal life. It's been amazing. And then it's rare that someone's going to say, no, I don't want to hear you. So then you have a better chance to share your views. And it's sharing in ways that people can listen. So with I statements and really looking inward from where you are rather than pointing out what's wrong with others.
How do you approach conversations that feel like they're stuck in one cycle? And are there any specific tactics you use to break through?
One of the things I've learned is there's timing. Like there are times that I'm with people that we vote similarly, but the amount of rancor and put downs and whatever, I have found that's not a time to jump in. I just listen. I used to participate, and now I try to, not add fire to the fuel to the fire. But there are times for receptivity, and I think one is asking questions and being sincerely curious. There has to be a sincerity to this. If people are acting civil, but they're rolling their eyes and doing other things, it doesn't work. But finding the time. One thing too, I love to walk and talk with people. And sometimes when you get away from a face-to-face conversation or a heated room, you can have a better conversation. One thing I would like to add too is really asking people, how did you come, what personal experience had shaped your view? And those personal stories are so revealing, and they make it really easy to understand, oh, well, I get why you feel that way. And that really leads to empathy. And I've learned that empathy doesn't necessarily mean endorsement. So you can empathize with someone without giving up what you feel too.
So related to zero empathy, how do you think people can develop empathy when dealing with those with radically different views?
I think this will kind of repeat my last answer, but I think really trying to find out what is fueling either their anger. When there's anger, there's usually other emotions behind it. If you think about it, you're just not angry over nothing. A lot of time anger is based with fear, worry, and so, asking someone, I can tell this really upsets you. Tell me more about that. Like where did this come from? But it really has to be from a place of concern and not a gotcha.
Can you share a success story or moment that made you feel that your efforts were truly making a difference?
I have one story that's so touching. I hope I can tell it without crying. So I do this work with middle school and high schoolers also. And I was at a middle school. It was about 40 eighth graders. And they did learn about how polarization can lead to stereotyping and ways to break stereotyping. And then also that listen, acknowledge, pivot, and perspective. So I asked the students, what are you taking away from this? And immediately a boy raised his hand, a 14-year-old boy. And for purposes of this story, it's important to note that it was a week after Israel was attacked by Hamas, and the boy was wearing a yarmulke. So I'm sure this was really a loaded topic, and or a loaded moment for him. And he said, I am so happy to know that I'm more than the stereotype. These are some of the things we talked in the workshop, that things are more complicated, that I'm more complex. And I want to remember that about other people. And then he said, and he was looking at this boy next to him, and this boy was shaking when he was talking, so it was very emotional already. And the boy next to him was kind of looking at him like, I don't know what you're going to say, but he kind of nodded. I could tell there was some connection between the two of them. And yet the other boy did not know what the young man was going to say. And he said, my friend and I here have been friends since we were 4, and I'm Jewish and he's Muslim. And since the attack, the adults in our lives do not want us to be friends. And I am going to take the skills that I've learned. I'm going to listen to the objections my parents and others are going to have. I'll acknowledge them. Then I'll ask them if I can share my view. And then I'm going to tell them that we are going to be friends no matter what's happening in the world at large, even though it'll be very hard. And what's so amazing about that moment is you could hear a pin drop. By the end, the Jewish boy was shaking and had tears in his eyes. And if you think about 14-year-olds, this is not the time you want to be emotional. So you could hear a pin drop, and then his friend jumped up and hugged him, and the kids in the room were cheering. It was really a very meaningful moment for me and for them.
Looking back at your journey in combating polarization, how has your understanding of the issue evolved since then?
Boy, I've learned that things really are complicated, that issues cannot be summed up in a headline, they cannot be summed up in a 1-minute newscast. There's so many layers. Part of that complication, though, or difficulty makes it overwhelming. So one thing I will share, I was a teacher for many, many years, and I talk to my students about having 3 feet of influence. And this might tie into another question, but I have found that I can't control the overwhelming issues in the world, but I can control 3 feet of influence. So I can treat people next to me with kindness and compassion. I can let the person who's in a hurry get in front of me in the line at a store, and I can just be kind when I can and back away when I can.
How do you measure the impact of your work in addressing polarization? And are there any indicators that let you know if progress is being made?
I think that one story of that was just 2 hours with that group really showed me there was impact. Whenever I do workshops, there's always people that stay later that want to share a situation and how they're going to use these skills. I also have people email me and ask me questions. And another thing, I went to the Braver Angels convention a year ago in Gettysburg, and we had to wear red and blue lanyards, and I'm not thrilled about identifying by color. I think in one way it can perpetuate stereotypes, but one of the founders said, Mary, watch what happens when people wear these. Well, we saw a sea of people, reds and blues, talking with each other all week, laughing together, walking together, having fun. And it was visually symbolic of the unity in the room, even though we would have very constructive debates over dinner or during events and stuff, but all with respect.
What gives you hope for the future when it comes to
I'm meeting people that are really tired of the chaos. And when I talk to people and do this work, I realize there's way more common ground than you'll know by in the news. I think we are told that we are totally divided, and I think we need to recognize one-on-one that may not be true.
For someone just beginning to think about how people can contribute to reducing polarization, what advice would you give them?
Well, I think that 3 feet of influence is a start. I also think thinking about the views that you have, wonder about where they came from and why they're cemented. I also just want people to think about the alternative. For me, hope is a noun, but for me, hope is an action word. It's a daily decision that I'm going to try to make this a better place. And I think it's a choice, just one person at a time.
And lastly, what's the most important change you'd like to see in the broader culture to combat political polarization? And what message do you have for the American general public?
Well, I hope the general public will demand civility in the leaders in which they choose. And I see it at all sides. I'm not pointing at one particular thing. I would love to see news reporting be less commentary and more fact-driven, or having multiple points of view presented. So just giving us a chance to see that there's hope. And I love that they do report stories of people helping one another. They could do that in politics, because if the focus is on winning instead of building solutions, we're not going to get anywhere.
Thank you so much.
Okay.